As a firefighter, you learn very quickly that when ash starts to fall on you, it's time to get out. When there's a wall of flame, that's much more serious.
It seemed to me, in my recollection, that we went from winter to summer. We kind of skipped spring.
The first fire was reported in the Ear Falls area on April 29th, which was an indication that conditions were pretty dry. When the fire was reported, it was reported in the evening. I believe we had a cancel aircraft at the airport at that time for a fire bomber, and it tried to go out but couldn't. It just couldn't fly. That was the day that the smog from Mount St. Helens was covering the area and there was no aircraft flying.
Overnight, the wind stayed up and the humidity stayed low. We were expecting the winds to die down and the humidity to come up, and that not happening just didn't make much sense to us. And when we were there the next morning, about our only option was to try to do a backburn in front of the main fire, which we started doing, and we basically were lighting fire along the entire Dixie Lake Road to try to remove the fuels in front of the head of the fire. Unfortunately, that didn't work. It jumped to Dixie Lake Road and very quickly spread towards Gull Rock Lake. There were some cottages and camps threatened. We were trying to do some values protection on those at the same time.
The fire is coming over the hill, this horrible mass of fire, and you've got these people standing there, you know, feet braced and ready to just kick ass. It was like that kind of feeling. It was really fantastic.
So in the evening of the second day of the fire, there was a wind shift and the wind swung around to the south, so now the fire was spreading to the north. What was the rear of the fire became the head of the fire, and it was heading towards us at Bug River. All of the people were very nervous that night. We had ash dropping on our tents and you could see a wall of flame. Well, the fire had burnt to Gull Rock Lake. It had taken out the hydro lines. Obviously, we were concerned about the safety of our own people. We took turns taking scouting drives, trying to get in Dixie Lake Road. At some point, and I don't remember the exact time, probably 3 or 4 in the morning, we made the decision that we had to evacuate that base camp. I'll never forget driving into Forestry Point with the 65 people and waking up the district manager at Everly and the field services supervisor, Tom Campbell, and telling them that the winds had shifted, the fire was heading north, it was heading towards Red Lake, and we needed to think about some evacuations because it was pretty obvious it was rolling towards Red Lake.
They came and asked me if I would like to leave right away because I did have some asthmatic problems, but I could only take the baby with me that I was breastfeeding. I couldn't take the rest of the kids, so I declined.
My sister was evacuated out the very next day. She had asthma, so she was one of the first ones that was sent out on, I believe it was a Perimeter aircraft. And I had a boyfriend there that was in the front line, so I was probably more concerned about him than my mom and dad and my sisters.
The important things were the pictures. Somebody told me the best thing to do was to bury them, so we basically went in the backyard, in the garden, dug a big hole, and put the garbage bags with the pictures inside and buried them there. And fire or no fire, they'd be safe.
I had put my money in the freezer, and Angela had brand new figure skates, so I'd put those in the freezer so they wouldn't burn, and I left it all there. And I went to Winnipeg. I didn't have enough money to make a phone call when I got there.
The cat was outside, the goalie equipment was safe, we were getting out, the neighbors were getting out, and if it should burn, well, it burns. What can you say?
First, we were told that we were going to be evacuated to Mackenzie Island. And having 4 children, and one of them being, well, a 3-year-old and a baby, I was kind of concerned that I was going to be stuck in the bush with these 4 children. So, yeah, I had packed a lot of pick and bug spray, things that I would need for in the bush.
The radio had suggested people were going to Mackenzie Island, so we had a boat at camp, and we packed everybody and everything into the boat and drove to Mackenzie Island.
The plan was to move the people from Madsen, Sturt Olson, Red Lake, Bombertown to Cochiner and Mackenzie Island. and that's what was communicated. Of course, you always have to worry about panic in these situations. So a communication system was set up. It was broadcasted on the radio. The municipal firefighters would go around sound sirens, meaning that people had to move to Cochran and Mackenzie Island. But what they didn't know at that particular time was arrangements were being made with the Air Force that, if need be, to airlift everyone out of the Cochran Airport.
I just remember like hordes of people just coming off of the ferry, and I remember the majority of the islanders like being very welcoming.
At the time, my family had a small acreage in Sandy Bay. It was about a 3.5 to 5 acres, and it was a small island with a little footbridge over it. All I can remember doing or saying to my dad in lots of explicit is, "Get the F off that island, you're going to be dead, and never mind the dog, I'll look after the dog, because I'm staying behind." And I've never talked to my father like that. It was just, and he said, "Okay, Tanny, I'm going." And so I phoned back to make sure he'd gone, and he had left, and they did get evacuated.
At one point, somebody had mentioned that it was on the highway. And I remember thinking, that's our only way out of here.
The fire burned across the highway between Harry's Corner and Bombertown, coming right up to the edge of Red Lake. So access now to Bombertown and Cochran was cut off.
I remember driving the highway from Bombertown into Red Lake before it was closed, 125, and seeing fire on either side, and driving down this sort of alley between the flames and thinking, oh my gosh, this is really frightening. And how do firemen do that? Go straight towards a fire when really what you want to do is go in the other direction.
Jim Morley and I were asked to take a boat, go over to the golf course and walk into the community of Bombertown, because we had no idea. The houses in Bombertown could have been on fire for all we knew. And as we did that, as we went across the lake by boat, it was a solid wall of flame on the south side of Red Lake and the south side of Bombertown. For those people that had never experienced something like that, it must have been mind-boggling. And you could hear the Hercs on idle at the airport in Cochran.
The wind was blowing right towards us, and it didn't look like something that man could stop. It looked out of control.
And I can remember looking at that thinking, there really isn't much hope here. We might as well get through our heads that we're going to lose everything, and everybody else is going to be in the same boat. And after I sort of accepted that, I felt better, because that was the worst that could possibly happen. Going down to the ferry from the campsite down to the dock to get on the ferry was, for me, the most upsetting, distressful part of the whole thing, because our dog was used to being with us all the time, and of course she followed us, and I knew she was upset, and we kept saying, go back, and of course she wouldn't. And it was just really disturbing. And of course we were trying to hide in the crowd to get away from her, and she was trying to get through the crowd to get to us. Walking into the Hercules reminded me of Jonah in the belly of the whale. It was enormous and dark.
People were lined up all the way down William Street in Cochran, and you ended up walking all the way along the highway up to the airport. You were in line with people talking about what they had in their bags, and I remember a woman that was married to another M&R person, and she had her grandmother's silver in her bag. That's all she was taking. That's all the cutlery. And people had pets in their bags.
I remember there was a lady who had a big bag, and we could hear this little dog barking, and she had her little dog in the bag and stuff. So I remember my mom saying, shh, don't say nothing. So, and I remember she brought it to Winnipeg, so she got him on there.
The kids had to say goodbye to their father, and by this time they were aware that there was a fire. They could see it, and they were scared, and they didn't want to leave their dad. So I do remember trying so very hard not to cry. And 30 years.
And when the last Hercules went out, the guy drove up the ramp and in and out of sight. And then he stood at the back of the ramp and he saluted. And then the ramp went up and the plane went. There's the last plane out.
I remember crying on the plane because we had to leave my dad and 2 brothers behind.
I was concerned about my dad. He'd come back in, and when I was able to go back home a few days later, he said that it was a really eerie feeling. He got up one morning and there wasn't a sound, and he went outside because he didn't quite know if he was in a dream or if he was really in Cochenour, because there was nothing. There wasn't a person on the street. There were just dogs running around, and he felt really very small, very insignificant, and wondered where he was almost. I think that was the first time that I kind of thought that, gee, my dad isn't invincible. He's human, and he can get scared too.
Most of the stretch that we were living on the island during the main part of the fire, it was like a, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a dream world, or as if time had completely stopped. It was a very unusual feeling that I'm not sure I've ever had since, and may never have again.
When we arrived in Winnipeg, it was just getting light by then, and the door opened, and I remembered the air was so fresh and clean, and I didn't realize how smoky it had gotten in Red Lake until I got off that plane, and the sun was coming up, and it was a fresh new day, and we all got on this bus, and they took us over to St. James Civic Center, and that's where we met with the Red Cross. And they were prepared for us. They had everything that we needed.
And people would, like the store clerks and that, were like, oh, you're from Fire 14, you're the evacuees and stuff like that. So it was like everybody knew about it. So you kind of felt famous, I guess, to some extent.
For several days, it was media tours. We weren't trying to hide anything from them, and it became a very valuable resource, because bear in mind that all of the communities from Starrett, Olson, Madsen, Red Lake, Balmertown, Cochenour, Mackenzie Island, the majority of them were in Winnipeg watching the news.
The anxiety when the people watching the news, and we were hearing false reports, Madsen burnt, Red Lake, okay, that type of a thing.
And by the time the phones were back up and running, I actually got the opportunity to talk to some people who were in Winnipeg. It became quite evident, including my own family, now that I think about it, who was in the Ottawa Valley, how they were keeping updated by what the media, the information the media was providing them. In the middle of the night, the winds dropped off and the fire dropped down out of the trees and was now at a surface fire where we could actually get in and work the actual fire line. So I don't know why that happened. That's weather.
And when we got back to Red Lake, there was quite a few planes that come back by then, and there was dogs everywhere and cars parked everywhere, tents left everywhere. It was like the remains of a good party. There was food everywhere, and it was rotting, and yeah, it was not a good thing coming back.
That was quite the experience approaching the island, because there was an entire herd of dogs of every description, large, small, and they're all leaping and wondering, is this my family that's coming to pick us up? It was just a wee bit intimidating too, to pull up to that dog and go wandering amongst that, but our dog wasn't there.
There was a feeling of family. There was never any cross words said amongst anybody. Everybody pulled together, and it was the most unique experience I've ever been through in my life.
Just the way people pulled together. People throughout the town, the OPP and some of the townspeople, and not quite the same afterwards.
I think most of us felt very proud of our efforts. And that was fairly early in my career. So I don't think I was prepared for the criticism that quite often you get when you work for the government. But they are taxpayers, And then the rumors run rampant as to what happened, the decisions that we may have made were in question. And at that particular time, I remember thinking that when the people left, we were heroes. Totally different story when they returned.
To see just how close it had come to town, you realize what kind of a disaster it could have been. It was just that close.
We went down the highway past where the fire started towards the TV Tower Hill and turned around, and you could actually see the mine head frames overland because there were no trees left on that side. You could see overland right into Balmertown.
I found this was one of the few times, maybe the only time, where I've really been caught up in something that was an unexpectedly dangerous, in some ways, event that authorities needed to take charge in a way they didn't usually. Although I was stepped back from it because I had decided I wasn't going to go, I really saw how that affected people and how you might feel about that, and I felt pretty resistive to it, I must admit. And I really felt for people who had others in their family who were ill, dependent, not in a good condition to be traveling, and still they had to somehow make that happen.
I think the greatest thing I learned through that forest fire, and it's been reassured for me so many times in the last 30 years since, is that what small towns are about, and the coming together and the caring, like all the different things that people did for each other. People that they knew, people they didn't know, people that they didn't like, that they argued with the day before, and then they were helping out. It's just, when you get to a crunch, this town is such a fantastic place to be. And I think when I came back in that road, I knew that I wouldn't be moving out. And I think that's the first time that I really felt that. And now, should anything happen as I get older, and I think, I might have to move for health reasons or whatever, it just rips my heart out to move, to have to leave Red Lake because of the people that are here. They're pretty remarkable.
to fight forest fire is to prevent it from starting. Do your bit. Be trained and keep fire out of the woods.